What is up, everybody? Happy Money Monday. As you can tell, I have my main man, Mr. Justin Schenck, on the line with me. I'm going to say Justin on the track. Justin's on the track. I feel like a rap song every time I hear the music, like leaning into this.
I was like bobbing my head.
But I hope everyone is doing well out there. Everyone had a good weekend, Super Bowl Monday to you, and had some time to get yourself back to neutral, recharge the batteries. Today we have a really impactful, I guess, training, kind of leaning in discussion, and I couldn't pick a better person to have this discussion with. Today we're going to try to cover within 30 minutes-ish how to be a great host and getting the most out of your interviews when you're interviewing your phenomenal guests out there. As we all know this, when you're coming to podcasting, there's a lot of hosts out there that are doing it 100% wrong. When they're asking questions, maybe they'll send questions over and they'll go, I'm going to ask these questions. There's nothing worse to watch for me as someone that really understands the art of questioning and getting to the core and the root and the nucleus of someone's story and really shining a light on that. There's no other person I would probably want to have this discussion with. So, Justin, thank you so much for coming on today. And I guess we can probably go into detail on this. There's so much to cover. But for the most part, I guess you would say, what is the most pervasive issue when it comes to a host when they're trying to frame their questions with the right guest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's a ton of stuff, like you said, we're going to try and get into in this short amount of time.
Right.
And it's so tough because obviously we want to start with like, what are people doing wrong? Right. Just so people kind of have a light bulb moment of like, okay, I kind of do that. Right. So first of all, when we say wrong, it's not meant to hurt feelings. It's not meant to say you're terrible. It's meant to say we can make some adjustments to get more out of your guests so you're serving your audience in a deeper, more impactful way. And that's really the purpose of podcasting at this point is one of two things, right? You want to make an impact or you're going to teach somebody how to do X's and O's. That's really kind of the two tracks of podcasting. I think one place I want to start out from is you have to bring yourself into the interview.
Yeah.
I've been on podcasts where I have a great 10-minute conversation before the person hits record and we have a good time and we're riffing back and forth and it's like this really good conversation. All of a sudden they hit record and they go, all righty. And all of a sudden they're Mr. Podcast guy. And I'm like, what just happened to the guy or girl that I was just talking to before? And I think we have to get comfortable. And I think you can talk to this, Chris, too. It's like, we have to get comfortable with who we are and what our approach is. Like, I don't edit my show on purpose to let people know that mistakes still happen 350 plus episodes in. And I am just myself. And I say really dumb stuff. Like, please go listen to some of the episodes where I'm like, why did I do that?
I don't even know what we talked about in both of ours. I know I came on yours and you came on the Win-Win Effect. And you can definitely tell there's a lot of us being 100% authentic and 100% real on the call, and I guess you would say call or recording. Because I think we even alluded to a couple times. We've been on other shows, and they'll ask us, "What is your 3 best books?"
Yeah,
like what is it? I'm like, I don't know. Like this week, that's really hard for me to answer. I'm like, well, what led you here? Why should we listen to you? I'm like, I don't know. You invited me on the show. Like, why would you ask me that question? You're pigeonholing yourself, and that's one of the things why we wanted to start the community we did with Winject Studios, was that we have a general love for the art of the game of podcasting, not just podcasting. It's just putting a label on it of asking the right questions and getting to the core and the root of what really drives that individual. Because there's a lot of pivotal moments in their life where it could have been a crossroad for them to choose one path or choose the other path. And I think it comes with just naturally what we are as individuals. We're both empaths. So we 100% feel, and we immerse ourselves in the other person's story, I guess you would say, and we feel what was going on in their frame of mind at that current time in their life for them to make that type of decision. And that's something that a lot of people don't really go into detail on. And I'm like I said before, I'm conscious of the time because there's so much we can go into detail on just on that one topic. But what jumps out to you the most to kind of like maybe describe that to the people who are tuning in today?
Yeah, there's a couple things that you said, like, right, like a lot of people, and there's a lot of podcasters that do this, and I get why. But they go, what's your favorite book, or what are your favorite 3 books? And I actually made an Instagram story kind of or an Instagram reel kind of as a joke about this, like showing people my favorite books. And by the way, they weren't even my favorite books. They were just the first 5 that I grabbed. But the question that I would ask myself as a podcast host is, why am I asking this question? Like, where does this lead? Where does this go? And what's the point of it, right? Like, if I just ask somebody, what's your favorite book? Well, and they say 3 books you've never heard of, where are you going from there, right? So you have to almost set yourself up for what is next, right? And so when I look at my interviews that I do, I say, okay, I know where I want this conversation to go, because I hope you did your research. I hope you know their story. And I kind of know where I want to take it. But then I look at myself as the director of that conversation to guide it to that point. And me asking, what's your favorite book, or a canned question that I ask everybody, is not going to get me there, right? And I have to feel what they're saying, why they're saying it, and truly pay attention. So like, I'm self-diagnosed ADD, right? I was a terrible student because I can't pay attention to people. So I immerse myself into the conversation of active listening. I'm listening for a purpose. And I think that's the part where people miss, is they're just listening to get to the next question versus getting deeper into the questions. Does that make sense?
No, it does make 100% sense to me. I mean, I was flipping back and forth through some notes that I had from previous interviews that I had just on my desk. And I just happened, when you were talking, and I was like, okay, and I had that one. That was a really good one. All like really good to me, because not that I got ugly baby syndrome when it comes to my show. It's just I really have a genuine interest in the individual that I'm interviewing. Yeah. So when I go to interview, like I won't say the person's name right now because the interview hasn't went live, but the person that I have on this piece of paper, there's 7 bullet points of areas of opportunity for me to bring up it casually in the conversation that I wanted to know more of. And I only ticked off out of these 7, 4 of those. What does that say to you overall?
Well, it means you were listening to what they were saying and you guided the conversation down deeper paths. Actually, really, really good example. Sean Merriman, former NFL player.
Yeah,
he was
guy.
on one of my him and I, we exchanged some emails. He hasn't come on the show yet, but he was on one of my friend's podcasts. And I love my friend. He's got a great show. But Sean was telling his backstory. And he talked about how his work ethic came from having a single mom who had to work 6 jobs and all these other things. And he was telling this part of the story. And he literally went from that part of the story to, wait, how do you get ready for an NFL game?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Katie Couric was giving an interview one time, and she was talking about the art of why she does what she does for a living. And there's nothing worse than listening to an interview, and you have the interviewer ask the guest or ask the person or project or whatever you want to call them, and they go, yeah, and they talk about it, but they don't rebuttal on top of that rebuttal and dig deeper. And that's what I mean by sometimes just framing the question and giving them options on how they should answer, not predetermining their answer, but just seeing where they end up talking about it the most and where their mind goes to. And wherever their mind goes to, I know to drop an anchor on that if it's a positive emotion. And then I'll reframe back to that and reference to drop that anchor and to say, you mentioned in this question, you answered this way. What changed from your way of thinking on X, Y, Z? And they'll go boop, and it opens them all the way up. Yeah. And I've watched you do this in a lot of your interviews. You don't really know the question you're going to ask. You'll start saying a bunch of things and you'll go, okay, there's the question there. From you're gauging the person and what they want to talk about and go, okay, they're comfortable about talking about this. We're going to hit this. And then they'll go boop, and you'll open them all the way up just because they're more comfortable now having the conversation because you did your homework.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that. You talk about gauging that person, and I do. I feel out their body language and what are they comfortable talking about. And you can watch them, right? And so now everybody uses Zoom, and so we're so used to video conferencing. I've been podcasting for 5 years, and so I actually started using video from day one when nobody else was. And the reason I did that is because I needed to see their body language. I needed to pay attention to where they were comfortable, what they would lean into. And you watch your guests as you're talking, their face lights up with certain questions. And I'm like, okay, cool, headed down the right path. And I think sometimes we're so worried about pushing the wrong buttons or offending them or saying the wrong thing or making them feel uncomfortable that we don't ask those questions. So we need to pay attention to that body language.
Right. Well, paying attention, I mean, I come from the world is sales, leaning into, education, entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of story there. But I think the most impactful conversations come from non-video to me, because I'm a little bit more into their story and I'm paying attention to how they're going about answering the question, using their tonality, listening for what they're not telling me, sniffing out I guess you would say this, I used to call them Sunday school answers. When you get to Sunday school, like, oh, I really don't want to tell you this answer, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. I'm like, oh, you're full of shit. And then I'm going to keep asking the right questions to get them to, expand a little bit further. I even go as far on prepping myself for my interviews, when especially like Meltzer, you got Boger, all these bigger names, especially those who've been on a bunch of shows, it's difficult. So I always ask myself, how do I stand out in today of the world of podcasting if someone's been on 50,000 shows? So I went at the biggest name on that platform on podcasting, Steve Sims. Steve Sims, if you don't know that name and you're in podcasting, there's a good chance you don't listen to that many podcasts. This guy has been on every podcast show in probably the last 5 years. When he came onto the Win-Win Effect, I did my research. And when I did my research, I didn't do my research on all the things he wanted to talk about. I did my research on how he would go about answering questions from all other shows. So when I went on YouTube, typed in Steve Sims, what is it? The art of, was it Bluefishing, his book?
Yeah, Bluefishing.
Bluefishing, the way he would answer questions, I was paying attention to the subtle drops that he would just happen to, open up a little bit more about. The host didn't really dive into deep on that, no rebuttal. I was like, there's an area and opportunity there. If you listen to the show, I don't know if you listened to his episode, but if you listen to how I'm going about answering his questions or asking the questions, I'm rebuttaling and then I frame it. And he even stopped me halfway through. Have you read this is bizarre. How do you know this? I never read your book, but he goes, this is bizarre. Well, that opened him up to a whole different area of opportunity of questioning and getting the listeners something that he doesn't often speak about. And that's impactful. That's why that episode was one of the most downloaded for myself in a previous year.
Yeah, actually a really good example, the fact that you dove in and took the time to get to know him opens him up. He's like, wow, this guy's not just another podcaster, right? A really good example of this, if you watch YouTube at all, is that Hot Ones show. Where they eat the hot wings as they get hotter and hotter and he interviews celebrities. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because those celebrities, 90% of the time will go, whoa, how do you know that? Whoa, how did you do this? And literally it's the host that does the homework. I actually knew a guy who worked on the show, on the production back end. The host actually does all the homework himself. So he gets to know them on a deeper level. He gets to know things that nobody else knows. And he does it twofold. One, to earn their trust, but two, to go in a direction that's never been done before.
I love that you said that. I love that you said, just to touch on that, just real quick. I love that you said that the host did the homework himself. Because, you've been on all these other shows and you have teams that do all this stuff. That is probably the most impactful, I guess, little info drop for someone that's going to do some homework. The host or the person that asks the questions needs to do the homework themselves. I love you said that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's true because it gives you a different feel. You kind of know what you want. Your team might not. Your team will be like, okay, cool. He talked about this on a podcast. That's what he'll talk about on this podcast. But here's the thing. People now, you talk about Steve Sims being on every single show. He's been on mine. I think he's the number 3 or 4 most downloaded episode. But, he's been on every single podcast. Okay, well, then why would I listen to him on Growth Now Movement or the Win-Win Effect? Well, I know those hosts get different things out of their guests. So those are the episodes I want to listen to because otherwise it's literally the same story verbatim through and through, right? And I've had people come on my show and they've tried as a guest to give me the same thing they gave everybody. And it was my job to go, nope, we're going over here. Let's talk about that, right? And that's why Ed Milet cried on my show because I take them into new directions they've never done before. And so that's the way a podcast host, in my opinion, has to think is how can I deliver something unique with this guest, whether it's a no-name individual who's just starting out or somebody who has millions and billions of followers that I really want to make an impact with this person, if that makes sense.
One of the things that in the industry where I come from, I would always look at the end result of the customer's experience or the buyer's experience during that process with myself. And I would always ask them towards the end, how would you rate your experience? Is there anything else I can do differently that maybe would reach a larger audience, or maybe make your experience a little bit more easier for you, and then also a little bit more challenge for you to get the most from it. But one thing, and it's kind of difficult in podcasting to ask those questions, but the one way that how I kind of gauge how well I did on the interview is how well that person promotes the show after. I'm telling you, the people that I have onto the show, it makes me so happy and so fulfilled to watch how they promote that show. They'll go this episode, and they'll do it themselves. That means the world to me on how they felt during that interview. They felt that they were open to having a discussion and ask a lot of probing questions. They didn't really reach. I didn't try to make them feel a certain way and predetermine some answers. I let them have a good time, and they'll go, I have no idea what we just talked about today, Chris, but it was so much fun. Thank you so much. That means the world to me. And I know you feel the same way when you have your guests.
Yeah, and it's 100% true. Like, I'm interviewing individuals that I want in my life. Like, I want to build relationships with them, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a friendship, whether it's camaraderie in some way, shape, or form. Like, you see the people behind me on my wall. Like, I'm friends with the majority of these people that I can literally just reach out and be like, hey, what's up? And the reason I do that is because I take the time to get to know them. I give them my time. I pay attention. I dive in. And I know you've been on these podcasts. I've been on these podcasts where they mail it in, right? Like, they're just like, okay, another podcast, another interview. And they'll literally just check the boxes. And then it's funny. And I'm sure you feel the same way. And I'm sure you could talk to this too. As a guest, you feel like you need to okay, this isn't very good. So I need to over deliver and over pour in. Like,
I'm going to save your show for you. Okay. Stand by.
Yeah. Dude, and it happens, right? And so these individuals now, with podcasting being what it is and as popular as it is, and people doing, Brian Bogert has done 150 plus shows, if not more than that. He's doing like 20 a week. I'm like, first of all, how do you even find the time? But it's one of those things where it's okay, cool. How do I stand out? So he shares it out. How did I get 𝙁𝙬𝙖𝙧 to email it out to his email list of 1 million people? Yeah. Like, these are the things we have. And I did, by the way, which is still mind blowing to me to this day. But it's really about diving in and being unique and bringing, like I said in the beginning, bringing yourself to the conversation. Like, Chris, you're unapologetically yourself, and that's a huge strength that a lot of people don't have. So I actually have a question for you. Like, was there ever a discomfort level for you in this process? And then what are some things, hosts can do to get more comfortable as they build that confidence? Because I think a lot of times it's a confidence issue.
The only uncomfortable, I love the question, by the way. The only time that I was ever uncomfortable is that they didn't do their research. And I know that for sure they didn't do any research about me, and they'd ask a dumbass question. So, and what I mean by dumb question, there's never really a dumb question. It's just the way they went about asking the question. And I was like, well, damn, if they would have just did a little research, then they would have already understood that I've covered that on a lot of other shows. I'm like, hey, I appreciate, and I'm never going to be the person that's going to shit on them. That's not my way. I'm always going to, how can I elevate you to elevate others and elevate your audience? So I would say, that's a good question, but here's how I would go about asking that question the next time you have a guest, and here's why. And then I re-explain and then reframe that whole question for them to get to what they needed and what they're actually looking for, because I can use my emotional intelligence. And just to answer the second part of that question, maybe some tips on a person that wanted to be a guest on a show. What I would do is I would listen to probably maybe 5 to 7 episodes, pick out the ones that jump out to you the most, maybe some of the most recent, and figure out where they currently are and what they like to talk about and what are some of the rebuttal questions they tend to ask guests. So that way you don't get really caught off guard when you answer a question and then go, I don't know where they're going to go to. Person that came onto the show, Jerome Myers, and people understand Jerome. He's part of the Winject Studios as well. His show Dreamcatchers, and I'm going to be at one of his virtual events. I love it. Love that guy. What he did, and kind of like stroked my ego a little bit when he came onto the show. Hey, I listened to the last 10 episodes of yours, and he gave me specifics, so I knew for sure he listened to them. Then that was his way of stroking the ego, and obviously that's something that we can talk about. That's how he was able to get the most out of me of asking him the right questions. It's kind of like forcing me to level up. So if you're a host, I would say doing your homework is one. You need to do your homework. Just do your homework and just have a genuine interest in that person or project. And say, from before you hit record, just say, Justin, what are some things that you want me to bring up for sure? And I'll make sure that I do it. And also, what are some things that are off limits? I always ask those two questions. What are some things that are off limits that you don't want to talk about? And I'll make sure I stay away from that. They appreciate that the most.
It's funny. I'm glad you said that, because I always do say, where do you want to go? And I'll tell you why I asked this one. Where do you definitely want to get to? Like, what are you promoting? What is it you want to talk about? I'll make sure we get there. Because what that does is it literally drops the veil for them, or the wall that they have out to go, I need to get there. So I'm going to talk about that constantly. So it relaxes them, right? I actually used to ask the question, what's off limits? And I stopped. And here's why. I actually had Jarek Robbins on my podcast, who's Tony Robbins' son. And I go, what's off limits? And he goes, my dad. And this was back when I used to write down questions, and I don't do that anymore. I'm more conversational now, but I used to write down these questions, and I was like, oh shit, there goes five of my questions. And so I looked at that and I said, okay, well, by the way, he ended up telling a very emotional story about him and his dad. And how they were raised and like all this stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. I still made him comfortable enough that he went there on his own. But I went, if I handle these conversations properly in any way, I can get them to go there. And then that way I'm not.
It's all about probing. I love you just said that. Said that. You said that I don't want to talk about X, Y, Z. And then what you did is you just probed around it and see where, depending on your comfortability with the conversation, they'll go there on their own. Yeah. If you just got to lead them and create the opportunity for them to feel safe during that time to share more. And I love that you just touched on that, because it's all about probing around that area of opportunity, where even if they alluded to the fact they don't want to have a conversation about, we'll touch on some things that are connected to that and just see if they'll go with it. And if there's a hard no, you'll feel it.
Yeah. You'll definitely feel. I mean, you'll feel it. I've had some hard no's on when I was interviewing people, and I was like, "All right, moving on." So next, but you know, it's funny. Like obviously, when I look at what I've done over the last 5 years, obviously, you were very, very successful in sales, and so you're comfortable having the uncomfortable conversation at times. I was not. Like before podcasting, I was kind of shy. I had dreams of being not shy, but I was kind of shy. I was worried. I was always worried about rubbing people the wrong way, and so I think that it is a skill that can be learned, which is why I love what we're doing with 𝑊NJX Studios, which is where we do deep dives with the members of the studio of the network, how to do it. Like, how do we build this skill, this craft? Because it can be learned. Like, you can be the shyest kid on the planet, the shyest little girl, the shyest little boy, and we can literally teach you the things and the skills that you can build on to then become the best podcast question asker in the world, the best podcaster in the world. And that's what I love what we're building with 𝑊NJX Studios, because we're literally creating a massive impact by giving people the skills they need to get to the next level.
What are some things, if I was, say, for instance, a brand new podcaster, okay, what are some things that you would kind of shine a light on for me to be a little bit more aware of when I decided to bring on guests and to ask questions?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to not be the copy and paste podcast question asker, right? Because like when I first started interviewing people, I would listen to full length episodes that they've been on other podcasts and all these other things, and I literally ended up being like, "Oh, I like that answer, so I'm just going to take that question." Right. And so what I ended up doing now, and I obviously I do my own research, I do the deep dives, but I will only I'll literally randomly pick like the 22-minute mark, and I'll listen to 3 to 5 minutes of like, okay, cool. Let me get a feel for their cadence. Let me get a feel for their emotion. Because I already know the backstory. I read it, right? Like I know the points that I want to get to. So I kind of do research in a different way now. And I think that that's a big takeaway for people is like, especially when you first start out, you're worried about filling the time. You're always worried about, can I fill the 30 minutes, the hour, the 2 hours, however long your episodes are. And so you do too much research. And so I would say, take snippets and then make it your own. I think that's going to be the best tip that I can give somebody starting out, is being like, stop worrying about how Joe Rogan's asking the questions or John Lee Dumas or whoever, and ask them in your own way.
Right. Do you pay attention to some of their posts on social media and the things they like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do hot topics, right? Like, so
Mhm.
what are they in now? Like, what is their big talking point now? What is all the thing? And I'll also be sensitive to things that are happening in the world, like what's timely, right? Like I've done the COVID episode, I did the Black Lives Matter episode, which was phenomenal, by the way. A guy named John Lee Iverson, who was the first Black ringmaster for Barnum and Bailey's circus, and also the last ringmaster period before they went out. And so he's got a phenomenal story, but we talked about what was hot right then, right? Which was Black Lives Matter, and a very important topic to talk about, which the world still needs to hear, by the way. But with that being said, I think always know what it is they're masterful at. What is exciting for them at this moment, right? So like there might be somebody who usually talks about how do I become a millionaire, but all of a sudden over the last 3 months, they're talking about leadership.
Yeah.
That's where they want to talk about now. They're not trying to talk about the $1 million anymore. They're trying to talk about leadership.
Yeah. I even hear sometimes in episodes of me doing my homework or me kind of prepping myself, I'll hear the person ask the question and then they don't listen really truly for the response all the way and knowing the intention behind why they just said what they said. And they cut them off and they drop themselves into the story. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that was a huge area of opportunity. And it was actually a really good host that did that. And I was waiting. I waited a little bit longer in the interview just to see if he would come back to that. And they never did. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write that one down because I know for sure that he should have asked that what, when, why, how question. And that's just a diagnostic question. For those who are probably listening to this right now, I'm going to go, okay, it's easy for these two guys to say. They got a lot of skin in the game and they've done this. All right, great. But ask yourself these set of questions. And everything that your guests are saying, ask the what, when, why, how question. The why question, it comes with a tie down. That's the most offensive question you can ever ask someone is why. So when you hit the why question, you don't know where they're going to go with the answer. I ask questions that are pretty much rhetorical. And here's the reason why. I can lead that question to a lot of areas of opportunity for them and us and the guest. So when I'm asking the who, what, when, why, the why is always at the end to say, why do you feel that you went down that road and put yourself in that situation? If I felt out the rest of those questions, the diagnostic ones, to where I know I'm going to spark a positive response. That's what the show is all about for myself. The win-win effect is adopting the winning mentality. I can't have negative shit on the show, right? So The negative stuff is how to overcome the negative and lean into the adversity. But would you say that that would be a good way for someone to start that maybe isn't conscious of the way that they would normally ask questions, but looking for the right response to reframe and put it back onto them?
Yeah, that's huge. I didn't know you did that. And I love that. Like that's super smart because I do that a lot. Subconsciously, I've been doing that for a long time as far as like, I know how I'm setting things up because I've heard them say it a certain way. And I'm like, I know if I say this, they're going to say this. I know if I say this, they're going to say this. And then what it's doing is getting me to a point where I can then break through that barrier of, hey, look, I never heard you say this. Like, what is it about this thing over here, right?
Love that question.
Yeah, and so I think that's huge. And by the way, you talk about us having skin in the game. We're about to wrap up here, but you talk about us having skin in the game. I just want to share a really brief example of that doesn't always mean you're going to knock it out of the park. Like we all still make mistakes. This wonderful woman down here, Gretchen Rubin, who is a multiple-time New York Times best-selling author, came on my podcast. And the whole time I talked about the only book that I knew of hers, which was 4 books ago, which was called Happier, right? And so that was literally the conversation. She was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. And if you go and listen to that episode, which again, huge heart, great woman. I was honored to have her on my show. But you could feel the discomfort of her being like, this was my stuff 6 years ago, bro. Like, why are we talking about this? And so that kind of ties back to why now I dive into, okay, what are they talking about now? Not what I know them for. And I think that's super important. So yeah, we still make mistakes. I'm still not perfect.
You pigeonhole yourself. I mean, and I kind of give some advice to people that maybe want to hold yourself accountable and you want to take the next leap and start critiquing some of your interviews. That's difficult. And that was one of the biggest moves that I did for myself when I wanted to reach a certain level of success in sales. I started listening. I hate the sound of my voice. I'm not listening to that for me. I'm listening for them, How can I increase their overall experience of working with me during that time? When I'm listening to interviews, I was the crazy guy walking inside of Starbucks and going, shit. And they'll be like, what is wrong? And I'm like, nothing, sorry. It was a question that I didn't ask because I was maybe uncomfortable to ask that question. It comes with mindset. I had to, adopting that, not just a winning mentality, but an abundance lifestyle. So in order for me to ensure that I'm going to bring the heat on every conversation, I need to level up myself.
Yeah.
So you can ask any question you want to ask people. Doesn't mean they're inclined to answer that damn question. You got to make their experience. You have to make them feel comfortable answering the question, not the way that you want to answer it. But I love about asking the diagnostic questions, just to put a little cherry on top for somebody listening to this. When you ask the who, what, when, why, how questions and going into that sprinkling in a why, if you frame them and you lead them in the right direction, what you have on your piece of paper, what you want to get them to talk about, they'll go, Chris, now that we talked about it, I have something to share. Can I share this? And then they go nuts. And I'm like, haha, you knew where I was leading you. Yeah. And like, that's expert level to me. When I'm like, I hear someone say that to me, I go, and that makes everything else worth it when I'm preparing myself for that interview.
Yeah. And two, like when you have a guest that says, yeah, I do want to go there, but before we go there, pay attention to that too. Like what did you miss? Like what are the things that you're missing? But I love that tip, man. And like I said, any podcasters that are watching this that aren't part of the Winject Studios yet, go to winject.com, right? It's winject.com. They go click, there's a button about halfway down the page, click on it. You'll get on the waiting list and to become part of this network that we're building out so you guys can level up. And look, we're not saying you're a bad host. What we're saying is we can always get better, including myself, including Chris, including all the other podcasters that are part of the network. Keep honing that craft. So please, as you see on the bottom, winject.com, sign up, join us, because we're here to take every single person who has a podcast to the next level. And I'm really excited about what we're going to dive into during the Q&A sessions that we're doing with the community and everything like that. But this has been phenomenal, Chris. Thank you so much for doing this and putting this together.
Man, you was I couldn't pick a better person to have this kind of in-depth conversation about. And just for everybody else understanding this, when we mention the word network and joining us, we're not joining. It's a community first. Community is what it's going to take to really fine tune our abilities and becoming great at what we do. There's a lot of podcasts out there. How do you stand out? Becoming the host that actually puts in the work and really has a game plan on what they're trying to accomplish, getting to the outcome and then reverse engineering it and putting yourself back into that conversation. So for those who are wanting to learn more information, there's a reason why we do have a wait list there. The supply and demand with our first 50 shows came on board our community. Then we're now focusing on collaboration with those first 50 shows. Then we can build the network and making collective impact. So just to kind of clarify, I know that probably some questions will be sent in from that. But other than that, guys, all you have to do is just kind of take a step forward and then reevaluate some of the things that happened during that step. You can't just take a step and go, okay, I want to have a great show. Well, listen to what you're asking them and how you frame your questions. So other than that, Justin, thank you so much, man, for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you. This was fun.
Right. Carolyn, hit the music. Cut this off. It's a wrap.
This podcast is part of the Winject Studios network, where podcasters come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how to apply to join the network, go to www.winject.com. That's WINJECT.com. If you're ready to make a difference through podcasting, then we're ready to see you there.